Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Naomi's Garden's second virtual event, Tools, Tips and Resources for Parents in Lockdown and Beyond. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing and I'm Naomi's Garden's event manager. I am hosting this evening's event. The pandemic and lockdown has thrown routine, structure and normality out of the window for all of us, but especially for children. And this is something which parents, families and carers have clearly felt. We hope this event will do what it says on the tin, provide you with tools, guidance and practical takeaways to get you through the last stages of lockdown and the future, with the help of our wonderful speakers this evening, who will be sharing some of the challenges they've encountered professionally and personally during this difficult time. Before we start, I'm just going to take you through some virtual housekeeping. We're using Zoom webinar, so it means we can't see you or hear you, but you can communicate with us using the following functions. Firstly, there's the chat box, and it's great to see people using that already. Please share who you are, where you're joining us from, and what you're hoping to get out of this evening. By using the chat box, you're helping us to break down the virtual wall and make sure this is a sharing experience for all of us. The next function is the Q&A box, and please reserve this for your questions for our panelists. Please remember you can click on the thumbs up symbol to boost the question that you most want answered to the top of the list. There's also the raise your hand function, and you can use this if you'd like to ask a live question directly to our audience. To our panelists. We'll be able to hear you, but we won't be able to see you. We have enabled closed captioning for this event. If you look at the CC live transcript symbol at the bottom, you can choose to enlarge the symbol, enlarge the writing using the up arrow, or you can hide the subtitles. Finally, please remember this is a safe space for learning, sharing experiences and support. Please allow space and leeway when it comes to different use of terminology and language, and keep it kind and respectful. I'd now like to hand over to my wonderful friend and colleague, Sarah Jane Walker, lead conductor and director of Naomi's Garden. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Neil. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you so much to my panelists as well who've agreed to join me on this event, which I think is really needed and it's going to be such a valued resource. So this event has come from going on a journey with parents for a year and seeing how much you guys have had to take on so many different roles, not just being parents, which can be hard in the easiest of times, but also educating and therapist and all the rest of it as well. And I've heard so many of you say, I'm actually on empty, Sarah, and I need some help and I need some resources to help us. How can we access help? So hearing the cry of your hearts, we have put this event on, and I've just gathered some amazing friends and some amazing professionals who can really help, just start to help you problem solve anything that you're going through at home, but also looking at kinds of education, so putting it in the educational box as well. And the other reason we put this event on is it's Conductive Education Awareness Week. I'm really passionate about my profession. It's really holistic, and that's one of the reasons we've got so many different professionals with us who kind of cover so many different topics. So I'm really hoping that this evening will be valuable, not just to parents, but also to professionals, because I think it's really good to share the information that we are expert in. I think it's really important that we can enable parents to use that and to take it into their homes for their children. So yeah, thank you for joining us this evening.
Before we get started and before our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, we have a poll that we'd like you to take part in. And what we really want this event to be is led by you. So I'm going to launch a poll, and what we'd like you to do is choose the challenges which you have experienced during lockdown. And you'll see those on the screen right now. So I'm going to talk you through those, and we've got a few minutes to go through them. So which of these challenges or concerns have you experienced or had during lockdown? And you can select more than one. So we've got the need for comfort food versus healthy food choices for children. And that's obviously, I think we've all been there with that one. There's the impact of lack of contact with trusted others and uncertainty of day-to-day life on mental health. So children's mental health has obviously suffered during lockdown, and looking at how that's happened. We've got the cohesion between education, health and care plans and the challenges for this for parents and carers in a virtual world. Next is digital poverty and access to resources for online learning. Moving along, parents and carers feeling that they have to fulfill every role for their child. So that of the parent, therapist, protector from COVID and protector of mental health, and their educators. A lack of access and support for access to professional bodies needed for diagnosis for young children might be something that many people have experienced. Am I doing enough with homeschooling? That's the cry that kind of, I know friends of mine have kind of spoken about, concerned that they haven't been able to do enough. I have struggled to juggle homeschooling with my own work and that of my other children. Missed learning during lockdown. I think that's definitely a concern that rings out there, as children have missed school, not just the educational side of it, but that the social learning as well. And then the emotional impact of COVID-19. You know, it's something that is yet to be seen, the full impact of that. So I'm going to leave you just to take a look through those and to kind of vote. As I say, you can vote for more than one. And then what we're going to do is each of our panelists have submitted 2 challenges, and we're going to take the one that's got the highest votes for each of those, and they're going to talk about that challenge. So we'll give you a moment or two to vote. We've got 50% of people have voted so far, so we'll give you another couple of minutes to do that. There you go. Keep those votes coming in. If anyone does need any clarification on any of those, please do feel free to pop your questions in the chat box, and I can run through those for you. Thank you. Just give it a few more moments. So need for comfort food versus healthy food choices for children, the impact of lack of contact with trusted others and the uncertainty of day-to-day life, cohesion between education, health and care plans, digital poverty and access to resources for online learning, having to fulfill every role for my child, parent, therapist, protector, educator, lack of access to support and professional bodies needed for diagnosis. Am I doing enough with homeschooling? I have struggled to juggle homeschooling with my work and that of my other children, missed learning during lockdown, and the emotional impact of COVID-19. So we'll just give it one more moment. And we're really glad that this what we're talking about this evening will be led by you. If we don't cover the challenges that you've covered, that you kind of have experienced, then please do make use of the chat box and the Q&A box. So I'm just going to give it another half a minute. Just a few more people left to vote.
So nice to see people from all over.
It's one of the great things about virtual events, is it opens it up to a whole new audience that you don't get with physical events.
Wow.
There you go. So we're going to call it there. So I'm going to end polling and I'm going to share the results. So what we can see is need for comfort food. I'm just going to make a note of these. There you go, cohesion. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to end polling there. Thank you. Okay, so I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Caroline. Caroline Hind is here to talk about nutrition. And Caroline, the challenge that we're giving you to talk about will be the need for comfort food versus healthy food choices for children. I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. So hello, everybody. I'm Caroline. I'm a registered nutritionist. The nature of my training means that I am versed in functional medicine, which actually means that I look at the body and all of our problems from a very holistic point of view. And I think you would all agree that our mind, our body, our mental health, everything is sort of linked together. So it's a very whole body view of things. And what I'm trying to do is look at the underlying causes of what's going on the surface. So if we have symptoms of something, my job is to say, what are the imbalances that are going on underneath? So it's a little bit like if a warning light comes on in our car and we either just switch the light off, or we go and make sure that somebody opens the bonnet and has a look underneath and looks to see what's going on. So what we find in nutritional therapy is there are lots of ways through diet and through lifestyle changes that can actually begin to make a difference in people's health. We can't fix everything, nobody can, but we can make quite a difference if we get the right nutrients into people, we get the right lifestyle where they're not overstressed, and we bring them back into balance. And we all know, don't we? We all know how we can get what we call hangry, like in a bad mood. When we're hungry, we can get irritable. So we know that food does make a difference to our health. And we know that other issues like stress also make a difference. So I'll just say on a personal level, in my personal life, I have 3 sons, including twins. I've always homeschooled them up until the age of 16. I've always taken a really big interest in parenting and child development from an attachment point of view, how well we respond to our children and how they feel rather than just what they learn. So Neil, you talked about the challenge with the comfort food. I think we've all been in a situation where there's been lots of anxiety. There's a level of background stress, even for people who don't think they're stressed. And of course, that means we have been reaching for comfort food more. I think it's very much tied into our moods. I think the horror, and I know it's been mentioned already today, but the horror of having to homeschool when you have your own job to do, coping with children who are not having any connections, not having even the other professionals in their lives. I've watched my nephew over in America. He's 16, he has autism. He's been out of school since February, and he has become more and more withdrawn. He's seen no professionals and he hasn't understood the changing nature of his life. So what is interesting for me is, what can we do about this? Should we be doing anything about this while we're very stressed? And what little tips and tricks can we do to make sure that we give ourselves and our children the best chances of having a more even mood? So that's it from me for the moment, Neil.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Next, we'd like to move on to Nikki. Nikki, if you'd like to join us.
Hi.
Hi, Nikki.
Hello. It takes me a minute to unmute. Hello.
No worries. So Nikki, I'd like to put this challenge to you.
Okay.
Cohesion between education, health and care plans, and the challenges of this for parents and carers in a virtual world.
Great. Thank you. The first thing I'll say is that not all disabled children and children with special educational needs have a full-blown education and healthcare plan, but that doesn't mean they don't require additional support, and the school is responsible for delivering additional support for kids who don't have education and healthcare plans, as well as those that do. And all the processes that are outlined in the Children and Families Act about proceeding through to get an education and healthcare plan demand joined up provision between education, health and social care. And prior to COVID, there was an awful lot of research about how the EHCP processes were going, and the joined upness of the provision is the underpinning ethos is that people tell their story only once, that everything works smoothly, that everybody communicates with each other, that every authority develops a local offer, and the local offer describes all the services available to that child and young person, and it goes from 0 to 25. So it's got a very sort of joined up ethos and should work extremely well. Prior to lockdown, it was not working extremely well. There were various delays, etc., etc. And parents will seek a diagnosis to access support, and the process of diagnosis is slow and everything else. So that's context before lockdown. And when lockdown happened, the big question was, who's responsible for what, and how are these agencies going to work together in a virtual environment? And just some sort of headlines in relation to that. For everybody that's on this call, you've obviously got digital access, and you obviously are communicating effectively via this medium in English. So people who haven't got access to the internet, people who don't necessarily communicate in English or don't read English, are disadvantaged in all sorts of ways. And you might find a child who has a particular impairment, for example, cerebral palsy, autism, whatever it is, but it's exacerbated by social circumstances, which means that they are in an overcrowded environment, no garden. So it might be a whole family trying to do online learning and work via one smartphone, etc., etc. And their situation would be very different from somebody with the same impairment who's got access to all sorts of learning resources, space, outdoor space, etc., etc. So that intersectionality is really important. And my question is, which agencies are keeping their eye on that well-being aspect of a child's experience? Another thing I've been thinking about is that children will have grown in the course of a year. Who's making sure people's shoes fit? Who is making sure that, for example, if somebody uses a standing frame or a wheelchair, that is still the right size for that child who has grown? And how can parents navigate, for example, access to occupational therapy services, physiotherapy services, all those sort of things? And and is there a navigator somewhere in the system to help the families navigate? And then, of course, there's all the transitions. You know, you're going back to school, you might be at the point where you're leaving school. Who's navigating that transition to college? And everything around food poverty, all those other concerns are really important. And I think I've got to stop now, haven't I? But my key question is, how are services working together with the family at the centre of the process?
Thanks, Nikki. Could you also let us know, because you've got to do this, who you are and what you do?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I haven't done that. But so I'm a former special school teacher, and I'm Professor of Social Justice and Inclusive Education at London South Bank University, and I lead on the master's programmes in autism and special education needs and disability.
Thank you so much. Sarah, I'd like to come over to you next, and I'd like to put the challenge to you. Parents having to fulfill every role for their child, that of parent, therapist, protector from COVID and of mental health, and educator. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, like we said before, I'm Sarah Walker from Naomi's Garden. I am a conductor. I have been practicing now for 10 years, which makes me feel a little bit old, but I'm just absolutely enjoying just seeing so many children and adults access conductive education in Lincolnshire, because we're the only ones that do it here. And actually lockdown has managed to highlight different areas of conductive education that has a really high strength, because we've been able to adapt what we do into homes, whereas before it was very much a face-to-face surface. So many conductors around the UK have now had to just adapt what they're doing, and we found, because of the very essence of conductive education, what it is in terms of belief and sharing and believing in people's potential, we've been able to kind of keep spreading what we do through conductive education. So that's been amazing. So that's what I do. So like Neil said, the question that I've kind of been thinking about has been about parents having to embrace every role in the pandemic. So not only have you had to embrace being a parent and keeping your children safe from COVID, you've also had to suddenly take on, without much warning, I've now got to educate my child, and also I am not seeing my physiotherapist or my conductor or my speech and language therapist. Like, how on earth am I going to continue to allow my child to progress and to not see any stump happen? And I've seen so many parents come to me and just be like, I don't know which hat to wear today. Like, do I wear the education hat? Do I wear the therapist hat? Do I wear the parent hat? Do I wear the nutrition? Like, which one do I pick? And it's really been really almost sad to have to come alongside parents and just see them like really empty. And I just want to be able to kind of kick into that a little bit and just look at what we can do in our homes, especially, so my expertise is physical therapy, so conductive education, looking at how you can put that into your home life without it feeling like you're being a therapist, but you're just being a mum or a dad, and you're just kind of creating an environment for learning rather than it having to be in boxes. So yeah, that's me, Neil.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So next I'd like to come over to Tina. Tina, please do introduce yourself, and the challenge that I'm going to put to you is, am I doing enough with homeschooling? Oh, you're just on mute at the moment. Yeah, it happens, the phrase of the year.
I did it because I've got children in the background, so I forgot to unmute. Hi, my name's Tina, and I'm actually been a teacher for 17 years, so I'm looking at it from both angles, because I am at school and I'm a teacher, and I answer a lot of those questions that parents ask me on a day-to-day basis, and for the last year over the phone or through our online system, of the guilt and being able to juggle homeschooling with being a mum and everything else, and then feeling guilty because they're working from home, and also got 3 children and only 1 device. So I've had all that side at work and trying to support and be there for a lot of parents. And I'm also, I think probably my biggest achievement maybe in my life is that I have also got a son with cerebral palsy who's 20 now. So pandemic or not pandemic, for the last kind of 20 years, I've also done that at home, whether I work too much, whether I feel guilty because I'm going to work and he's at home and he needs therapy, or he academically needs extra work at home. So I also got it from that side really as well. So it's just that being that mum and work and juggling and kind of looking at it from both sides, and actually maybe sometimes taking that step back and realizing that you can't do everything, and that take one step at a time. And definitely had my battles as I've gone through with most agencies, most care plans, most schools, whether they will take Jake or not take Jake, or whether they want to do that therapy or not that therapy. So I'm kind of like a bit all over. One minute I want to give advice, next minute I need the advice. So it's been interesting.
And thank you, and that's why our panel is here to share their personal experience and professional experience. So thank you, Tina. Finally, we'll come to Vanessa. Vanessa, please take a moment to introduce yourself, and then the challenge that I'd like to put to you is the emotional impact of COVID-19 on children, and obviously the not knowing the full extent of what this might be. So over to you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Hi, I'm Vanessa Toyne. I'm an SEN teacher. I've been teaching special needs children for 15 years. I also have a son who's 27 with autism and learning disabilities. So I've lived it for quite a while too. The reason I put that challenge down was because there's so much in the media about mental health in children, and I am blessed to work in a school. I work for the Affinity Academy Trust over in Boston, and we have an amazing head teacher who comes from the same perspective that I do, that all children's emotions are absolutely key, and I'm sure you all agree, but absolutely key to their ability to learn and to thrive. And without a stable emotional base foundation, they haven't got the capacity to build on that. So our head teacher, when the children came back into school, said to all the teachers, you know, just don't worry about the learning. Get to know these children again. If we consider that during COVID, these children have had months of maybe only seeing siblings in their family, or maybe they're an only child, or maybe they have a difficulty or a disability that where they don't understand what's happening to them. My son particularly, despite being 27, he is really struggling. He lives alone, but he's really struggling to keep it together because he can no longer access the gym, which is part of his routine, which actually upsets him because he can't do what he was doing before, and that routine has been spoiled. And for him to come up with something creative to fill that gap and void in his life is virtually impossible for him. So what I've had to do is try to step in and say, well, let's have this walk, let's just do something that's going to make you feel better about yourself, but it isn't replacing that thing that he needs. Many of the youngsters that I work with are in need of, and I put on my description that I work with young people initially to find out what their normal is. And each and every one of us has a different normal. And that normal is key to where we start to build. So once I understand what the normal is for the child, that's where I start to build on their capacity to learn. Often with the special needs children that I work with, they will have some sort of sensory processing disorder. Or they will have a deficiency in a sensory area, and that is an area that I feel needs to be addressed for emotional well-being. So whilst we're talking about getting to know the children that are coming back into school and where they're at, it's really, really important that as educators we understand how they work and how they tick, and how their processing system is enabling them to feel grounded and safe. So these emotional battles that they might be coming in with might be due to isolation. They might be due to lack of education and lack of sociability. So that's where I'm coming from with my discussion. Is that okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. So we have presented some of the challenges that our panel have experienced personally and professionally. But now next is the part where we look into those challenges and we provide you with the tools, tips and resources that we promised, because sharing is caring. So we're going to go in the order that we went in. So Caroline, you spoke about the need for comfort food versus healthy food choices for children. What are your tools, tips and resources for addressing that problem?
Right, well, thank you, Neil. I could actually talk on this subject for about 4 hours, so I'm going to try and condense it down. But the first thing I want to say is we all sort of know that a big pile of sugary sweets is not going to be good for any of us. We know it's not good for the children, we know it's not good for us. But I just wanted to describe a little bit about what happens when we have something quite sugary. The sugar in our blood hits the ceiling, it goes right up, and our body quite kindly brings it back down for us. And what that means for us and for our children is that we crash back down. And we've all heard about low blood sugar. We all recognise that point where we've gone up with the sugar and we've crashed back down, and it can put us in an irritable, angry mood. It can make us look for more comfort food, and it fuels our cravings effectively, puts us in a bad mood. So one of the most important things any of us can do for all of us, both to stop reaching for the comfort food and to help our mood in general, is to flatten those sort of blood sugar spikes, okay? And if we can do this even a little bit, it can make a huge difference to mood, health, behaviour, okay? And for reaching for more of these kinds of foods. So we know about the sugar. What people don't think about as much is that when we eat sugar, carbohydrate-y, starchy foods like a bowl full of cereal, that also goes into our blood as sugar. So I'm going to show you the plate. I don't know if you can all see this plate of how a nice meal that balances our blood sugar should look. We've got this huge vegetable area. I mean, good luck with us trying to get our children to eat that much vegetable. But what I'd like you to see is, can you see that protein, the orange part, is a significant part? Can you see that carbs, so that's our cereals, our potatoes, rice, pasta, bread, can you see how small that section is? So when we give a child a plate full of breakfast cereal, does it fit this pattern? Now, I think you can see straight away it doesn't fit into a nice balanced meal. So this kind of meal is what flattens our blood glucose spikes, improves our moods, stops us reaching for other things, helps us with cravings. Now, we can't overnight suddenly make all our meals look like this. But what I would suggest is if we can start with one meal a day where we think carefully about including that protein and making sure we're not overloaded with this sort of starchy part. So I really do mean avoid a big bowl of cereal, avoid a big pile of pasta, and go for something proteiny. Now, at this point, I would normally say to you, what is protein? And you can probably think of the things like the eggs, the fish, the cheese, the poultry, nuts, seeds, any kind of meat. You can see what proteiny things are. And the idea is when we fill up on these proteiny things, and we tend to get lovely, good natural fats that come with them when we eat our eggs, for example. When we fill up with these things, not only do we make our blood sugar nice and even, but we also then are not so likely to go looking for that sugary sort of comfort food. Now, I have to say that most of us will still want something every day that makes us feel better in terms of food. And I would suggest write a list of what things those are and tell yourself, when are you going to have them? Are you going to have them just after your breakfast, just after your lunch? Leave it at that. You're not snacking on them all day because you're eating this kind of food that has protein in it, okay? But the big number one thing that we all know makes us go for comfort food is stress. And I think the number one thing that all of us, especially as parents, that we get wrong over and over and over is we are not very kind to ourselves. If we're more forgiving of ourselves, if we're just kinder to ourselves, and if we allow ourselves to rest, it's not always easy with children, but if we can find some rest for ourselves and we can actually prioritize that rather than feel guilty for it, then we're going to reduce our own stress and be less stressy with the children. And when you can reduce the stress in the family in general, then everybody's going to benefit. I'm not saying you'll never have lovely, nice treats, but you won't be rushing for them as much. So it's sort of a case of just prioritizing ourselves a little bit more so that we can then help the children and the whole family. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and you're saying there's still space for that, but it's just a much more balanced approach and a way of tackling it. I've definitely taken some practical takeaways from myself from that. I'm going to open this up to our panel, but Sarah, you are very, very kind of like hot on nutrition and interested, so I'd like to open to you first.
Yeah, so Carolyn is my nutritionist. I've not seen her for a little while, but she's somebody who I fully trust. And it's been really interesting chatting to her about going against the social norm of what we've been taught in terms of nutrition, and actually going with what she's just talked about in terms of lowering the carbs, upping the protein, because it just creates something in the brain which is really, really good and healthy, especially for our little ones who are developing neurologically and also just like at school. It's really, really important that they have protein to allow their brains to grow. Like, it's really, really important. So I would definitely say if somebody is struggling with nutrition with their child, or there's something that's not quite right in terms of development or something, take it back to nutrition. What are we feeding our children, and is it causing them to grow? Is it causing them to develop? I'm looking at this screen in front of me, like Vanessa and I have had so many conversations about the things that we're putting into our children's body because we don't know any different. But actually, we know things like gluten and dairy have like an actual effect on different conditions that we see in our children every day. We see coming up more and more often in our school system, such as ADHD and autism. There's such a link to nutrition. So yeah, that's my little nugget on the thought.
And if I could just say in that, I actually put my son when he was 4 on a dairy and gluten-free diet, and I did it through Sunderland University that at the time were looking at a condition called allergy-induced autism, and I sent a urine sample off, and I got the sample back and spoke to Dr. Paul Shattuck at the university, who talked me through the analysis that he'd sent me because I didn't understand all these graphs and things, and basically said that my son was lactose intolerant, that he had a condition called a leaky gut. And he went through all the science of that. There's a great book out there that you can get. I can put it on our resource list when we eventually send one out. But the first thing he told me to do was to change the dairy in his diet. So I put him onto soya milk straight away. And over a month, I took him off all the gluten products. Bearing in mind, before I took him off them, all he would eat was chocolate croissant and pain au chocolat. He would have bread, he would have chocolate spread, he would eat muffins and brownies, but nothing more. And within 2 weeks of taking him off the glutens, after I'd slowly over a month taken him off totally, 2 weeks later he was eating vegetables, he was eating chicken and fish. It was incredible. One of the reasons I put him on that diet in the first place was because of anger management. He was such an angry child. He was a biter, he would kick, he would punch. Just his ears used to go bright red, and that apparently is a sign that you can have a gluten intolerance if your ears go bright red, which is really strange, but it was something that was really pronounced with him, and it changed him as a person. He became a lot more compliant, and the idea of this leaky gut is that you have a hole, an imaginary hole in your intestine, and all of these toxins go into your bloodstream, which causes all this confusion in the brain. So you get those heightened sensory impairments, that sensitivity to light, to sound, to colour, just to touch. But it had an amazing impact on his life, and I would do the same again if that was me as a mum, and I was facing a child that I was really struggling with. I would advocate anybody, just give it a try. It seemed like a massive thing to start with, but you soon get used to pack-ups with a piece of chicken and some sticks of vegetables and fruit. So yeah,
Thanks.
definitely worthwhile.
That is the number one thing that can make a difference there. Yeah, the gluten. We can actually even test to see the level of addiction. So it's often the hardest thing to get your children off, because the things that they're not meant to have. So we can actually measure the opiates in the brain from dairy. So yes, it just makes such a big difference. And of course, the grains carry on the leaky gut. So yeah, it's wonderful, Vanessa.
Thank you all. Nikki, we'll come over to you. So how can parents, what tools and guidance would you share with parents that are struggling with that cohesion between education, health and care plans, particularly in a virtual world, but moving forward as well?
Yeah, okay. In the chat, I've put a paper that I put together with one of my colleagues who worked in a local authority, with input from 5 autistic families with autistic parents and autistic children, about how to deal with everything in lockdown. And it's sort of bullet pointed, so have a little look at that and we can send it out. But the main focus of it was about the child's well-being and the well-being of the whole family, including the siblings and the parents. So if school are sending things home for you to do, which is are causing meltdowns at home, the school might not realise that the child is very stressed, and the school really need to know. And it's really hard, isn't it, if a teacher is a sort of authority figure, but trying to feel confident to say to the school, this is the impact on my child of this thing you want them to do. It's just not working. And things like social stories are absolutely brilliant in terms of describing how a transition will be, what's going to happen and so on. But if the school sends you a social story at 7 o'clock at night to be done in time for the child to go to school at 8 o'clock next morning, it's too late. Just tell them, say, I can't do that social story with him, he's in bed, that sort of thing. It's really a good idea to find some kind of navigator in the system who will go between the different agencies. There's actually on iPlayer still, there's a panorama called Fighting for an Education, which is about parents trying to navigate school during COVID and everything else. And it's this thing about dealing with this treacle of bureaucracy. So if you can find some kind of navigator in the system who's a named person, that's really good. And if you're struggling without social networks around you, there's actually quite a lot of community support out there. For example, in Bromley, where I live, there's an organisation called Next Door, where there's all sorts of people volunteering to pick up your shopping and everything else. And those sort of networks can be really helpful, as can online support groups and all that sort of thing. And in relation to the child's well-being when you're at home, I really agree with what everybody's saying about nutrition. And food must never be a battleground, because that's just so counterproductive. And also learning must never be a battleground. And I feel very strongly that a child's special interests are a way into their learning and their happiness. And when special interests are described as obsessions, I find that highly offensive. Because if a child absolutely loves Lego, for example, you can do an awful lot of learning with Lego, can't you? And the other thing that I'll alert you to is the Westminster Autism Commission did a paper on harmful interventions. And just going back to nutrition is absolutely brilliant, isn't it? The natural, beautiful, lovely, healthy food. But there are a range of harmful interventions out there which are, they're all over the internet. So the Westminster Commission put together a paper about, don't be tempted to go down the road of giving your child these various nasty drugs, basically. So that's sort of a little cautionary thing, because I think sometimes people can get a little bit desperate and think something will work, and actually what works is better social support, working with a child's special interest, feeding them well, looking after everybody's well-being, and also being empowered to say to professionals, you're offering me that, but that's not what I need, this is what I need. And sometimes people need an advocate to help them with that, especially if English is not their first language.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Would anyone like to come in on
I think. Oh, sorry, Caroline, you go.
No. Should I just say one thing? I thought that was amazing what you said, Nikki, about education and food shouldn't be a battleground. And I think that with every aspect of a child's life, really.
Yeah.
And I see people force feeding children from a very young age. I see people having all sorts of rules about them being at the table and what they should do. And when we leave food around that's healthy and the children can just choose it when they like, and they can have as much or as little as they like, it works really well. And similarly, I completely agree with you on education. I'm not sure where we decided that we had to bribe children to learn or force them to learn, because actually, as you know, children want to ask questions, they want to learn. And I think using something like Lego or whatever the child's interest is, you'll find all the subjects can be done through what that child enjoys.
Thank you. Vanessa?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that with regards to that special interest, is that it's a detriment to the child to try and force feed some sort of curriculum palette that we think that they should have if they have that diagnosis. That special interest to them is a passion, and the depth breadth of learning that they will get from that is just immense. You can use that even to, I used to work with a young man who would never put his hand up in the classroom if you wanted to say something. So, but he used to like Super Mario, and we just got a lolly stick with a Super Mario on the top. He would hold Super Mario up, but he wouldn't put his hand up, because it's like, why would I do that? But Super Mario can do this. And they're just really simple things that you can work with the child. That's about finding their normal. It's not fitting them all into the same box and going, there you go, guys, everybody's all going to do this. It's, if they have that special interest, capitalize on that, because you will get richer learning for them out of that.
Thank you.
That's great, Nikki.
Thank you. Tina, I just want to come over to you because you said how that you had some issues kind of joining those agencies up, you know, with your own experience. What what advice would you give to people having gone through that?
Well, I was just listening to Nikki, and they were saying about the education as well, and I think it was, you know, everything I was just kind of going through my head before you came to me. I was just saying that every individual case is so different, and I think you have to remember that what you're doing is best for you and your family and your routine. And actually, and a lot of problems that I get, and a lot of parents that come to me worried, and how I've probably felt a lot in the past, is that it's a competition, or you feel you're in a competition, or you're being compared to who else is in the playground, or what other mums you're speaking to at a mum group, or and those other things. And I just feel I just definitely feel passionate about that, and that's one thing that I'll say to my parents. And also as a mum, I had to step out of and kind of think, you know, he's not the same as everyone else, so actually now I've got to stop worrying about not being invited to a party, or not at the minute, obviously in the pandemic that's not happening, but those other things. And also the agencies, what you were just, you've confused me now, because I was thinking about my challenge and then you've said agencies. But just I'll just have a quick look what I was going to say. And I was just going to say about also what you were saying about the education and the learning, is that, you know, during the pandemic, a lot of parents were messaging me, or at home with my family. Obviously, I was working from home and trying to educate my teenagers, was that actually make it fit around you. And that's why it's so important to stick to your individual timetable. I've had parents that have said, I can only homeschool on Thursday, Friday. I work from home Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's fine. Those children are not going to be punished. They're not school. It's going to be school's problem when they go back, or it's going to be school who help to get you back to where they are. You just do what you can do that fits around your family. And I think that's exactly the same with some of the children with disabilities. You have to have a look at what's priority for your child, and if literacy or numeracy or topic skills are not a priority, and like for myself, Jake's physical side was my priority, and that he's not academic and he wasn't, so I had to actually stop comparing myself to all these children that need to read and write. And Jake's 20 and still can't read and write, but he's had an amazing life, he's done amazing things, and actually his therapy was far more important. So instead of getting upset and me putting flashcards in front of him every night and words on his wall and in the bath, and I did do all the things through play, and I did get the Lego out and I did do all that, and actually in the end I still needed to withdraw from it and kind of say, he's at school for 6 hours, the teachers are there to try and do that. At home, my priority is his therapy, my priority is making him be able to stand or sit down. So it's really thinking individually about it. I have so many parents who kind of get upset and worried that somebody's brought this big topic castle in, and you know, the topic activities that we as educators have to give you doesn't mean we want to. That's part of our curriculum that we have to give them. And parents come with a baked cake of a castle and a wooden castle, and I used to walk in that playground, and in the end, with like the agencies and being brave, like Nikki said, with the teachers, you need to be brave in the end and say, he can't make a castle. I'm not going to make the castle. That'll be my husband's work if anybody makes a castle, so we're not doing it. And like Nikki said, it's actually being brave to those teachers, because as a teacher, I don't care if you did that castle or not, but I have to set that piece of work. And I think parents sometimes blame us that we're over making more pressure for them, but actually it's the government. And actually, if you speak to your teacher on a one-to-one, or the TA, or whoever's with your child, they'll say, just leave that bit, we don't mind, we don't care. And I just think that parents are too scared to do that sometimes, and actually that's what we want you to do as a teacher, is definitely.
Can I just add a bit to that and say, I
yeah,
also think teachers don't always realise the pressure families are under at home, because very often children save their behaviour which is a bit more of indicating distress for home, where they feel very, very safe and they're behaving in a different way at school. So teachers have no idea that they're setting something which is going to cause
so much
disruption for the whole family if you don't tell them.
They often don't just realise. They just don't realise. I have so many colleagues who just don't realise how hard that might be for you to get that child to do it. Do you know? But I think, you know, one positive that will come out of the pandemic is that actually teachers might now realise and this has opened up a different world of actually realising that parents can't do all that at home, and that, well, you know, don't get me wrong, I've worked with a lot of teachers over time, and some teachers haven't got children or different things, and they just don't realise. I just do think what Nikki said, you must communicate, you must, and stand up for yourself. You know, I in the end could, with that you said, with agencies and different things, it took me years. I was quite young when I had Jake, and I took my mum to every meeting to start with, and I needed her there, even at parents' evenings. And then he kind of got to about 6, and I was like, shut up, Mum, I can do this myself. And I pushed her away, and she was gutted, and she, you know, she couldn't understand why I pushed her away, but actually I needed to sit there now and say, this is what I want. And, you know, I whether this is every parent, but it's most parents that I speak to at school, and I'm a reception teacher, so I often get with children with special needs or any disabilities, they kind of come in young, and the parents are very timid and very worried and very scared, and by the time they leave in year 4, 5, 6, or, you know, towards the end of going to secondary, I have a thumbs up and kind of like, I knew you'd get there, because you get stronger. You do get stronger.
Parents are the experts in their own children. Teachers might have them for a year in their life, but parents have got them for the whole of the parent's life, haven't they?
Yeah, and you end up, and nobody would tell me now. I mean, he's 19, 20, and nobody would tell me now. But when he was 4 or 5, I've walked out in tears, and I mean, Jake, one of the reasons I looked for conductive and I found conductive was Jake was in reception, and he wanted him to wear. He had a frame, and he was fine in his frame. And they wanted him to wear a helmet to protect him. The teacher was just nervous. She was a nervous teacher. She wanted him to wear a helmet at playtime in case other children ran into him. I cried and sobbed and cried for days about that, and said, no, I don't want him to wear a helmet. And I signed in the end that, you know, I don't want him, it's my responsibility, I don't want him to. And it's just, and yes, you will come across battles like that, and other battles with you know, I've had everything. I think with physios and different things, and that's, you do get stronger, and in the end you just need to say, I know my child, but not get into work with them. I think there's a fine line between getting stroppy and knowing. And I think the same with the agencies. You know, we took Jake to America for an operation, and I had high up consultants at Sheffield Hospital saying, no, this is the worst thing you could do. And then 3 years later, that was the best thing you did. So you have got to go with your gut feeling, and you're the one then that makes all the decisions. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a comment in the chat box saying bravo, Tina. So thank you. Sarah, I'm going to come over to you. Guidance, tips, tools for parents that have felt that they've had to fulfill every role for their child, that of parent, therapist, protector and educator.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think that parents have just done, I mean, I'm a parent too, so I'm talking to myself here. I think we've done a really good job to get through this pandemic. We're nearly at the end of it. Maybe a few glasses of wine in, but we've done it, and our children are still alive, and that's, you know, that needs to be celebrated and championed. We did it. But in terms of, I'm just going to focus my question a little bit on physical disability and physical therapy and conductive education. So I've had a lot of parents who are like you've all said, like running out of time and just trying to get through so many different things. But one of the beautiful things about conductive education, and actually the desire in a child to learn and progress, is that just creating space for it, in a sense of, if your child maybe has cerebral palsy and is maybe 3 or 4 and cannot walk, pop him on the mat and see what happens with a few toys like a little bit further away. It's just about creating space and environment for them to be able to actively move. And I think often we think of therapy and or conductive education as, or physiotherapy as something that we do. It's like, okay, go on.
Can I just add in there that the last thing on that thing was on my list when I was making a couple of notes was talk about was the best thing that anybody ever said to me was, why are you making time for physio? Physio is about going to the toilet, or therapy. I know we've got the physio, but going to the toilet, or if he needs to go to the dining table for his tea, that is his therapy. Yeah. Stop panicking that you need a slot or 3 hours, or you need to do 2 hours a day for your therapy. And that's exactly what you're saying. Just do it naturally.
Exactly. Just create those moments where children can explore, because they love to play, they love to explore. And the amount of parents have come to me who have been accessing conductive education went, I just went for a quick wee and I came back and he'd rolled onto his tummy. It's like, I missed it. I missed the moment that I've been waiting for. Why? Because in conductive education or in therapy that they've started to learn all those tools that they needed to. We talked about neuroplasticity, we're talking about the brain, and we're talking about how, you know, neuroplasticity happens through repetition and practice. We've all practiced those things with your children, or you practice them with your children. Give them that moment of space to do it themselves, and they're just going to do it. So just maybe hide things that you need to hide out the way, but because they're the things they always grab, those things that you don't want them to. But it is literally just about creating those moments and allowing them to achieve and experience themselves, because we can show them, but that isn't learning. Learning is doing something completely yourself with, yes, some facilitation and with some verbal prompts, which is what we do in conductive education. But it is, so I remember when I was training, often like we'd have a group of 6 or 7, and not every child would always have a facilitator, even the ones who maybe were the most disabled. But it was in those sessions that we saw learning take place, because they suddenly had to do more than they would if a parent or a facilitator was near them, because they were given the opportunity to learn themselves. And so I would say that is one of the tips for, in terms of your physical therapy or conductive education, or if your child has cerebral palsy or other movement disorders, just pop them down, just let them just be and just see what magic happens, because it will happen. And then the other thing is, just like I see so many parents like running ragged, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to do that? How am I going to do this? I would say actually one of the things that we need to do as a parent is put ourselves first. We cannot give out of empty. And I know Carolyn has actually said that to me a couple of times in our sessions where we've talked about nutrition, and she's gone, but wait, when do you have Sarah time? And I've gone, oh, I'm not sure. But actually, we as parents, or we as professionals even, we cannot give to our children or to our clients or to our adults without making sure that we have time for our mental well-being, to recharge, and that you should not feel guilty for that at all. Like, it's really, really important. Your mental well-being is as important as your child's mental well-being, and we need to take hold of that as parents and also professionals as well. So yeah, I guess that's my bit.
Thank you. So strip it back,
yes,
where you need to, and take time for you, because that matters just as much. Thank you. Would anyone like to jump in on that? No, I think you summarized it really well.
Thanks.
Vanessa, we will come over to you. The emotional impact of COVID-19 and kind of tools and resources around that, and this is also a bit of preempting, isn't it, because we don't know what the severity of it's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when you've got a big class of 30, you've got to think about every member in there. But I think primarily what we've got to do as parents, professionals, is consider that element of fun. And I love what Sarah just said about giving them space. I think it's about giving young people space to be themselves, space to be able to explore and express themselves in different environments, whether that be small groups or whether that be one-to-one with a parent. Or I was listening to a really good podcast over the last couple of days by I listen to Brené Brown quite a lot. I don't know if any of you have listened to her. And she was talking to a Dr. Susan David from Harvard University, a psychologist. And they were talking about emotional agility and this concept of positive, they called it positive toxicity. And basically what that meant was, so your child comes to you and says something like, and this was just lifted straight off the podcast I listened to. So they come to you and say, oh, all my friends are going to a birthday party and I haven't been invited and I feel really left out, and what am I going to do about it? And our automatic response as a parent is we want to fix it for them. So we would maybe say, oh, well, let's invite some friends over on the same day and we can have a party here and we'll just make it all better. But what we're not actually doing is considering the emotions that that young child has had. What we're doing is we're wrapping it up in cotton wool and putting fluff on it and glitter and making it all sparkly, but we're not actually getting to the root cause of that young person's emotional well-being and their emotional literacy within that. So there are two elements of emotional literacy in that. We've got those scenarios where maybe somebody that we know has lost a member of their family or a pet even, and we get embarrassed and we don't want to talk about it, or we don't allow a child to talk about something that's meaningful to them. And what we're doing is we're preventing that ability to grow from that experience, to learn from that experience. What we're doing is we're almost putting a lid on it by ignoring it or fluffing it up. And instead what we should be doing is we should actually be getting down to their level, getting down to understanding the emotion that they're feeling, being empathic with them. So I think it's such a vast question, and I find it really hard to put into a nutshell, but I think we need to be considering our children's ability to converse with us as adults and find us as adults, and as a mum, and being available that if a child does come home and says, oh, you know, I'm not invited to the party, I'm feeling really bad about this, is to actually be empathic and say, well, you know, that must feel really awful, and how's it actually making you feel? Well, it's making you feel that you can't trust your friends, and if we haven't got trust, we haven't got anything. But what that's doing is validating that young person's feelings, and once we validate those feelings, then that young person can work through, with your support and through further discussion, how they're actually feeling, and be able to be open and honest rather than putting a feeling aside and not confronting it. Is that actually making sense? So one of the tips that I had was, for any youngsters that we have got are under 5s, is Essex County Council do a 50 things before you are 5. So lots of challenges to keep our young people thinking about things outside of school, outside of that educational pressure that I feel that many of them are going to be under to perform. If you are under 11 3/4, you can do 50 things, outdoor things that the National Trust are organising. So lots of outdoor activity, lots of running around, jumping about, making dens, having campfires, toasting marshmallows, doing all of those fun things as parents that they might not necessarily get the opportunity to do within the school. And I think what you're doing is you're feeding and growing their sensory systems through doing that. And that will just enhance their ability to learn. It will help them to self-regulate if they're not feeling, if they're feeling anxious about something. It's giving them an outlet for that. Anxiety is another part of our emotional well-being, and that we need small discussion groups, I feel, in schools where children can actually openly discuss and debate, what does it feel like to be anxious? Does anybody feel anxious? If so, you know, how can we help and support each other, so that the children are actually learning from each other and not just learning from adults, and the children are learning to problem solve about their own emotions and to build that emotional literacy.
Thank you. I wonder how many of us would cope with anxiety better if that had been the situation when we were at school. Yeah, definitely something that's overlooked. It is time for questions. So thank you for all of our panelists for kind of enlightening us as to the solutions, tools, tips and guidance around the challenges that we presented with you. We've got some pre-submitted questions, but if our audience do have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand to ask a live question. So firstly, we're going to do these kind of like a little bit quick fire. So I'd like someone to respond with your kind of advice to kind of like each of these pre-submitted questions. I'm a parent with a 5-year-old autistic son. For me, it's a case of educating myself further to give him the best I can and get the support for this to happen. Who would like to? Nikki, we'll come over to you.
Well, I think it's what we do at London South Bank University is absolutely flip that narrative around autism as deficit, autism as a big charity, a big sort of tragedy and all that sort of thing, because parents love their children, full stop. That's just all. And I can speak as a parent as well here. And then parents have to navigate a bit of a minefield socially, external to the child, of things like, you know, extended family commenting on the behaviour, navigating the whole terrain of challenging behaviour and all that sort of thing. So I think we start from the premise of love and support, acceptance, reframe ideas like about challenging behaviour. If a child has a meltdown, for example, something is wrong in that child's environment which is causing that to happen. So you look around the environment and think, why is that child so upset? Because the challenging behaviour is a pejorative way of describing an indicator that that child is distressed. So it could be something like the sensory environment. And the way to find out about autism is to read things that autistic adults have written about autism. So in South Bank, we've got the Participatory Autism Research Collective, PARC, and that's autistic academics who write about autism. And a lot of them are also parents of autistic children, as it happens. And they can tell you why they were like that, what was going on in their heads, how things made them feel. But the underpinning thing is love, positive regard, not making kids feel that they are wrong, and, you know, going with their interests and everything. And the most interesting article I recommend is something called Don't Mourn for Us by Jim Sinclair, who is an autistic adult who just gives his parents a bit of a talking to about, got an autistic kid. It's not this, you know, you didn't have that non-autistic kid. You've got to love me. It's your job. And life can be made a lot easier if services are not covered in the treacle of bureaucracy. But read Jim Sinclair, Don't Mourn for Us, for a start.
There are also some fantastic Instagram pages delivered by autistic people. So there's the Autistic Cats and Neurodifferent, and they're fantastic. We're coming over to Sarah next. I am both a parent and a teacher. I'm interested in conductive education and want to learn more about how I can use it in my work.
Fabulous. So parent and teacher. So if you wanted to learn more about conductive education, how to use it, you could absolutely reach out to other conductors. So we are we are all about collaboration. We're all about sharing what we do. It's really, really important. And actually, this being Conductive Education Week, we are trying to put it out there as much as possible that we really, really are excited to share the information that we have with you. So I feel like I need a little bit more information from you as a parent, as a teacher, but like the main thing about conductive education is like we believe in people. I know other professionals do as well, absolutely. But it's that sense of seeing a child have a problem, whether that be a physical difficulty or it'll be something emotional or behavioural, and then going on that journey. It's called the zone of proximal development, going on that journey with them to learn how to get to the other end of it. And it isn't just doing it for them. They don't go through a learning process. It's about creating learning processes where they can learn, they can grow, they can flourish, and then get to that end goal. And to be honest, like when they get to that end goal, we normally move it again, because that then moves into potential. And when we move into potential, we move into just incredible things. So I hope that answers your question. But please reach out to me on Facebook, or just give me a message and I could give you more information about conductive education as well.
Thanks, Sarah. Moving on, I'm a parent of a Down syndrome child and would like some advice regarding sensory play.
Okay, there's lots of books out there. In fact, I've pulled a few out. This is a really good one, 101 games and activities for children with autism and sensory processing disorders. Sensory processing disorder, the information about it is just so current, and there is so much out there. There's lots of stuff on the internet that you can download with regards to messy play. That is something else you might want to think about. Did they say how old the child was?
It doesn't say.
No. I think with anybody, with a child with any extra additional need, is to get down to their level. You know, if they're crawling around on the floor, crawl on the floor with them. If they're climbing under tables, get under the tables with them. Just get to know how your child works and build from there. I don't know if this makes sense to anybody that doesn't physically. I just do this as a matter of course. It's part of who I am and how I operate. But the literature's out there. There's loads of books that I can put a list together of really exciting stuff that you can access with regards to activities. But I would just say lots of food sampling, that might be good and exciting, looking at different textures, so squashy things in the mouth, hard things in the mouth, so to get that palate working. Lots of vocabulary. I use lots of visual symbols I use them for everything. Everything in my room is labelled. Everything is backed up with a visual symbol, even down to things like pen, and I'll have a visual symbol with the word underneath. The lady might want to use something called PEX, where it's a picture exchange, where you would have some symbols that the child gets to know and the child can bring you. So you might have biscuit, you might have drink, you might have toilet on there. And to teach that child, if they're communicating or not, but if it's on a basic level and language might be a difficulty, is that they're actually giving you that as a communication aid, but using words as well. But as Sarah said, if anybody would like to email me here on in, please feel free, and I'll give you some more sort of bespoke to your requirements and needs.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Someone's actually asked if we can write the title of the book and the authors in the chat box, if you're happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
To do that. That would be brilliant. Another question. I am a pastoral coordinator in a primary school in a deprived area. Encouraging children to play together at break times is now a little bit of a problem. Sometimes parents have used technology as a babysitter, and it's kind of finding it hard to kind of like get back into that kind of socializing. Tina, are you happy to talk to that?
We found very similar that we had quite a lot of mixed, it was different for different year groups, that when they came back, some children, we've had obviously about between 30 to 40% of children in school, and the rest were out. So actually when they came back, we found the younger years really excited and couldn't wait. In the older years in primary, this is, so the children from 8 years up to about 11 actually got into that routine of that the new friends they were now mixing with, or the new groups they'd formed. And the more we spoke about it and was preparing them for it, the more they were kind of pulling faces and we're not sure, or when are they back, do you know? So actually that first week we were actually quite concerned about what it was going to be like, and the barriers they might put up. But what we did, and hopefully a lot of other schools did, was we tried to make as much collaborative teaching as possible and try to free up more activities in the afternoon, again, like we said before, with Lego and science and different things where they had to work in groups and mix them up. But we did find that on the playground, it went straight back into obviously a lot of falling out, and we want to play with them and they can't play with them because they're in a different bubble. But as exactly the same, our pastoral person has been out on the playground physically, walking around and just trying to deal with it out there rather than them coming in to speak to her, and just making everybody on board of trying to set as many collaborative games. The sports coaches have been trying to set up games within the bubbles and trying to just form them new friendships. Unfortunately, I don't know what your school's like, but if you've got split classes, it could mean that the year ones, 15-year ones are not with the other 30-year ones. It really depends on the setup. So it really does depend on every school individually, but it's as much as possible we try to do as much collaborative things and have the pastoral person out there dealing with things as and when it happens. As Vanessa, sorry. Vanessa, sorry, was you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just saying, at school where I am, it's almost like the children haven't been away. It's just
the younger children we found that, but we have found, and I don't know the person who asked the question if that's what they were meaning, but we have found that from 7 upwards, it was a totally different response in school. They kind of got, and actually, if you think about it, it was over 9 weeks, so it's quite a long time to just form that new group and kind of get that barrier up.
Thank you. We've got time to address one more, and then we're going to go over to you all for parting words. My son is nearly 3 and is not yet talking and only just started to walk. He has global development delay and other things that we are not yet completely sure about. So it'd be nice to just get some tips and advice. Some advice on how to get him to talk would be great. I've already had lots of hemp and I do these things on a daily basis, but yet I still can't seem to get him to want to talk. Who would like to respond? Nikki?
Can I just say something about global developmental delay? I think comparing these sort of typically developing children's milestones are incredibly unhelpful, because if a child, there's all the sort of child development theory about what the child should be doing at a particular chronological age, and they may not be, and it puts an awful lot of pressure on families to think he's 18 months old, he should be doing this now. Well, he's still allowed to be 18 months old, whether he's doing that thing or not. And I think that thing of comparing a child who's developing atypically with a typically developing child is completely, fundamentally, utterly pointless, because you need to compare that child with themselves, because what you're looking at is incremental progress at that child's pace and activities for that child which are relevant to their developmental rather than their chronological age. And just, if grandma's saying, oh, we should be walking by now, well, grandma can basically get lost because he's not, is he? I think being quite assertive about the fact that your child is going at their own pace is really important. And in terms of communication, linking it back to cognitive development, a child has to develop this concept of causality, of cause and effect, i.e., I can do something to influence my environment, and communication comes out of that. So, you know, giving the child choices, using things like PECs or real objects, so they have to communicate with you what choice they want, giving them the opportunity to develop a simple yes/no response, even if it's just a vocalization, but giving them the reason to do it. So choice making in play helps a child to develop communication, because they have to know that their actions affect the environment. And that's something that, you know, developmentally children learn that at different rates. So just throw that book out of the window that says he's 5, he should be doing this, and think, oh, you know, what is he doing? And sometimes it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, sorry, Neil, is in my role currently now, I began working with a young lady that was non-verbal, and she's 5, but actually her acquisition of language within the short time that she's been with us is sublime. It's like, I was looking through her book and record everything that she says, and she must have 100-word vocabulary. Now, you wouldn't have known when we first met her and she came in as non-verbal, but actually the language was there. She just needed a reason to talk. And that was my finding with another young man that I worked with, that as an autistic young person, if nobody explains to you that this is a reciprocal thing, that we talk and somebody talks back to us, then why would you ever bother? And if nobody is quite insistent that you need to tell me, then you're not going to bother telling them, because if you grab somebody's arm and you get what you want, why would you ever need a word for it? So it's about creating those opportunities for them in a structured way to begin to converse in an effective way for them, and giving them those tools of you really need to tell me, whether it's passing me a card or whether it's giving me a word. So yeah.
Thank you. My friend Sarah, her son's autistic. He's an adult now, and she was saying how she used to take him into a toy shop, and he'd point at the top shelf at a train he wanted for over the course of several months, and she was to say to him, "You need to tell me that you want it." And then one day he just came out with it, and then she bought it for him straight away. You know,
I love it.
yeah. But you know, that went on for a couple of months. So. Thank you. Yeah. We are coming to the end of our session, and I think what you said, Caroline, we can talk about all of these things for kind of hours, but what I'd like to put to all of you now is to kind of leave our audience with your parting words. This can either be practical takeaway, words of support, or words of inspiration. It's entirely up to you. So Caroline, I'll come to you first.
Okay, thank you, Neil. I actually have 3 points now, because I had one and you've all been talking, and I've two that I have to say. The first is, I'll just repeat that I think we need to be kinder to ourselves. Sometimes we criticize ourselves in a way we would not criticize our best friend. So let's be all a bit more forgiving of ourselves. But some of the things people have said, I think one of the things that's really important is that children don't remember facts and figures, but what they do remember is warmth and feelings. So when it comes to all that education stuff, the best thing we can give them is just that feeling of security and that we're listening. And I think it was Vanessa who said about, you know, helping them to know what those emotions are that they're feeling, giving them labels and not just squashing down all the negatives. And it reminded me, and I can write this in the chat, but there's one of the books that changed absolutely my attitude was a little book. It's very easy to read, Siblings Without Rivalry. I'm sure some panelists here know it. Yeah. I bought that book when I only had one child, not 3, and it was just as useful with one child, because it was all about, let me be the detective and find out what's going on for this child at the moment while they're having this meltdown, and then helping them through that. So when they say, I hate the new baby, we don't say, oh, you love the new baby. We start to listen and find out why and help them to express it. So yeah, I'll put that book in the chat there. Thank you.
Thank you. Nikki?
Well, just have as much fun as humanly possible, because kids remember fun. They remember warmth, love and fun, and childhood is supposed to be fun. And with your children, their best is good enough. And as parents, your best is good enough. And everybody's heroic. You know, we're living in this massive global trauma, and the fact that we're just functioning in the way we are is really good enough. And it'll all come out in the wash. Tomorrow's another day. You're doing fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, just the same as what the other ladies have said, really, and just talk about it. Like, if you are struggling as a parent, if it is too much, I know we're coming out of the pandemic and lockdown is starting to lift, and shielding is ending on April the 1st. Hopefully that's not an April Fool's. You know, if you are struggling, just talk about it. Gather some people that you trust and you know love you unconditionally. Whatever your inner narrative is saying about how you're failing, it is completely not true. You're completely smashing it. So just open up to those around you who are positive people. Don't go to those people who are gonna kind of get in that negativity with you. Just speak to positive people and just share that load, well, however you're feeling, because as soon as you expose it, it's in the light and it becomes false, and we can start just to speak truth over how you're feeling.
Thank you. Tina?
It's just two things. The one thing, first part was that we can all have a crisis. It's quite normal to have a crisis. I think Sarah Jane's kind of walked into my house a number of times and I've gone, I'm not touching him until you've sorted it out. Can you help me? Do you know, I can't walk with him anymore. We're going to fall out, or whatever is going on in your life. It's okay to have a crisis, but sometimes just step away. And my biggest thing, I think, for my children and the children at school is praise and praise and praise, and actually just keep praise everything they do. It's as in your own life and in your child's life, whatever little step it is. So, you know, we've even praised going for a poo. Do you know, like we praise everything. We've praised everything, and a lot of people will say, and sometimes now I wish I could shringe some of my confidence out of my children. But those people say to me, why are your children all so big-headed? I think it's praise. They all think they're amazing. So I think it's just the key behind teaching and being a mum.
Thank you, Vanessa.
I think something that we started off with that actually I think you said, Nikki, is that as parents, you know your child. As a mother, certainly, you know your child better than anybody else, and have faith in that. And if you are struggling with something, to get your idea across, maybe to a doctor or another professional, just keep going. I've had many situations with, I've got 4 children, and with one or all of them at some point in their lives where I've had to fight their corner and be their voice, and I've actually always been right. So yeah, I really go with that one. And the other one I've got is you know, when you're working with children with special needs, often you think that they're not listening to you because they're not looking at you. They are. They really are, and they're taking it in, and you might not see it for 6 months, and then you will have a eureka moment where you can go, yes, it worked. It's incredible how they operate, and they are very amazing, talented people. And always believe that about your child, you know, even though they're not neurotypical, and I hate that term, but even though they're not, they are amazing young people, and they have gifts and talents just like everybody else.
Thank you. I mean, what amazing words from all of you to finish on. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to hand over to Sarah for a quick update on Naomi's Garden, and then just some closing remarks. Sarah, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you. Big thank you to Neil for hosting this event. He's just fabulous to work with. He's just so professional and brilliant. So thank you for keeping this event flowing, Neil. You are just amazing. And also thank you to our amazing panel who's joined us today. I've learned so much from all of you. Just feel like a sponge. I've been taking notes the whole way. So thank you. I think everyone will agree it's been so valuable. But yeah, just an update on Naomi's Garden. We are still running and we are still looking at growing even more. A lot of you know that we've been doing a lot of fundraising so that we can create a centre of wholeness where families can come in and receive conductive education and other therapies that we have going on, not just for the children, but also for the entire families as well. So we have several fundraising events going on. I'm jumping out of a plane next month. We're not going to talk about that. But we're also doing the National Three Peaks as well in June. So I have a team of about 26 or 27 COVID dependent that we're going to go and climb the Three Peaks, which is really exciting. So if you want to keep up to date with Naomi's Garden, whether it's our fundraising or our building or our next event, please do follow us on our social media. And also if you want more information from these amazing people on your screen, please do reach out because we can put you in touch with them as well, because I'm sure they'll be happy to share with you on a one-on-one too if you need that as well. But yeah, thank you so much everybody for coming and for speaking and for listening and just being. It's just been such a lovely evening.
Yeah, it's fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This event has been recorded. We will be sharing it on our social media channels. I've just popped into the link. And Sarah, website.
Yeah, it's coming. I promise. We're so close. I reckon it's going to be next week. We're getting
exciting,
there.
exciting. We will share that with you. We'll share lots of the resources that we've discussed. We will look at getting some quick fire written answers to the challenges that we didn't have time to get round to. But thank you to all of our audience for joining us. You've been great, and a huge thank you to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.